All right, let's talk about the Clippers, the team that I might be out of my gourd talking about, but I have them as my sixth seed in the Western Conference. So let's get this video started. Thanks for clicking on the video. My name's Adam. I'm doing all 30 NBA team season preview videos in reverse order of how I think the standings are going to go. So right now I'm talking about the sixth seed in the Western Conference, Los Angeles Clippers. I'll kind of go over these four things that we're looking at right here. Offseason moves, kind of how they did during free agency and the draft and such. Salary cap sheet, their rotations, and their win total according to Vegas. Before I get started, feel free to subscribe to the channel, like the video, comment on it. Let me know what's up. Let me know where my takes are landing for you. But let's jump into the Clippers. So looking at the offseason, there was some things that they kind of needed to do on their to-do list. The first priority, obviously, was to bring back Kawhi Leonard. I don't think there was really any movement of anything else that was going to happen. It was always going to be Kawhi wanting to stay with the Clippers. So they completed that. Good for them. Good on them for their efforts of keeping him and all that stuff. They also had to retain both Nicholas Batum and Reggie Jackson, who they ended up re-signing. Reggie Jackson has a very good relationship with Paul George on the team, and so you got to think that played a big factor in keeping him with LA, because he probably could have gotten more money somewhere else, but he elected to stay with the Clippers. They also, again, like I mentioned, brought in or re-signed Nicholas Batum, who had such an inspiring year last year, where he kind of fell off in Charlotte for the last few seasons, and then this most recent season with the Clippers, he comes in, plays defense, is kind of their hybrid or kind of their gadget player that can kind of do a little bit of everything. He can shoot, he can defend, he can play with the ball in his hands a little bit, and a solid veteran who's been around the league. So good stuff provided there from Batum. They wanted to bring him back. I think he's valuable and fits in with what they're trying to do in Clipperland. Let's look at what they did in free agency. Again, they didn't really have too much ability to do anything, but they did bring in Isaiah Hartenstein, who I think is a very, very low-key, good signing. He flashed some good stuff, at least offensively, for the Cavaliers last season, so that might be a completely random name, but I think he might have some minutes if there's any injuries with the front court of the Clippers, and he might come in and produce a little bit. Pass, shoot a little bit. I think he's just a solid player, but 10-plus man rotation kind of a guy. Justice Winslow, who has been just hit with so many injuries. We do remember a little bit of Winslow in Miami. I don't even know if fans even remember that he was with the Memphis Grizzlies these last couple seasons, or was it starting last season? But he'd been with the Grizzlies, never really played on the floor with them. Again, he's been very injury prone throughout his career. But when you see what he is on the court, he's a solid defender. He can play make. He had been improving his shot. So just so much potential there for Justice. And I don't know if he'll ever get back to that point. But it is in kind of a high risk, or not a low risk, high reward kind of a deal for the Clippers. And I liked that, and was always interested to see where he was going to land in free agency. The big trade that happened is they traded away Rajon Rondo and Patrick Beverley to the Memphis Grizzlies, along with Daniel Oturu, and they brought back Eric Bledsoe, who was with the team a few years back, played reserve point guard role back when Chris Paul was leading the way for the Clippers. And so Bledsoe had been coming off two kind of not so great seasons. His most recent season with New Orleans just didn't go to plan. He just wasn't too great, and you do wonder if there's a little bit of him that just, if he shot completely as a player. I think maybe he can grow again. I think the Clippers have shown us with Batum last year that maybe there is some hope that they can get him to do things that make him comfortable and make him succeed as a guard in the league again. So interesting pickup there. The big move, the trade that happened with sending Beverly, Oturu, and Rondo out. Again, this saves them money, so it kind of made sense bringing a guy they know who is, they know a little bit because he was with the organization before, and then also helps them financial for the books. And then quickly, we'll just go over the draft here. Keon Johnson dropped in the draft. A lot of people thought he was going to be like a top 10, 8 to 10 pick in the draft. He drops, lands with the Knicks, who then trade him to the Clippers. Jason Preston, who is solid. I don't know if we'll see any of these three guys that I mentioned during the season, but they're just good dudes to, see if they can grow into anything. Preston, along with Brandon Boston from Kentucky. And so three guys that, again, probably see a lot of G League time this year, but ultimately I think they're good investments for the future, especially for a team that went to the Western Conference Finals. To get three good dudes like that, I think is pretty good for the team. Let's jump over to the cap sheet here. So obviously we know that Paul George and Kawhi are kind of the main money makers on this team. So they're making about 40 plus over the next 3 years. Their contracts do line up with each other as far as years and expiring, when they expire, I should say. They have Eric Bledsoe's contract, which is fully guaranteed this year, but then next year there's a non-guaranteed deal. So they could technically waive him and not be, hit with as much money. I think that's probably what they'll do, but we'll just see what Bledsoe becomes. And, maybe there is some motivation to keep him, but I just don't see that exactly. Just, again, looking at their salary cap situation. Marcus Morris played pretty good in some games. I think he's definitely kind of on the overpay tier of players. I don't think he is worth the high teen numbers that he's going to get within these next couple of years. But nonetheless, it is what it is. Luke Kennard also making $12+ million over the next 3 years. They stopped playing him in the playoffs a little bit last year. The defensive liability is a little bit of an issue. You do get some scoring, a little bit of playmaking there with Kennard, but I just don't know exactly kind of how they feel about that. I mean, is there a point in the season where they look at both Morris and Kennard and say, hey, we just got to get off this money, and are willing to maybe part with one of these young drafted players to be able to get that done? So I don't know. It will be interesting to see there. But we're talking about 3 years with, including this season, Paul George, Kawhi, Marcus Morris, and Luke Kennard. Reggie Jackson re-upped. We mentioned that, so we won't really talk about that. Serge Ibaka was hurt for the last part of last year. We'll see if he can provide something. Again, he's a little bit older. This will be his, I think, 13th year, according to the cap sheet. It'll be about his 13th year in the league, so we'll see what happens there. And then we also mentioned these other players for the team. So again, what... This team doesn't really have too much flexibility to make a trade. Again, there could be maybe a deal where you want to send Bledsoe, Morris, or Kennard just for money purposes, but not really anything too crazy that they can change with their roster other than maybe working in the buyout market a little bit when that time comes. We've already kind of mentioned other players that we kind of have in mind as to if they might be bought out. Maybe like a player like Ricky Rubio, maybe like a player like Al-Farouq Aminu, who's been with the Clippers before. So just names that maybe could pop up. But outside of that, probably nothing crazy coming from the Clippers roster-wise. They'll roll out who they have, minus Kawhi and any other injuries that they're going to deal with. And, this will essentially be their team. Speaking of their team, let's talk about their rotations. This is according to Hoops Hype. And Ty Lue also mentioned this as well, that he kind of basically just said what the starting five is going to be. And it is going to be Reggie Jackson, Eric Bledsoe, Paul George, Marcus Morris, and Ivica Zubac. Reserves here are going to be Terrence Mann, Luke Kennard, Nicolas Batum, Serge Ibaka, and then they have some of these younger players. They played Harry Giles last night, or a couple nights ago, in the preseason game, and he looked pretty solid. Again, just a big that kind of got lost in Sacramento, and maybe you can develop him into something that he wasn't in Sacramento, which, again, Sacramento doesn't really have any good players that they develop, and the ones that they do, they want to trade. So maybe you can get something out of him. For the most part, I don't really see any too big rotational battles here. There is potential where they get Terrence Mann more minutes, but are they going to be willing to say, hey, Bledsoe, let's reel in your minutes. Hey, Reggie Jackson, let's reel in your minutes, and let's give him to Mann instead. Maybe. I kind of see that situation maybe with some of the front court players. So like I don't think they'll like overload Batum or overload Morris or overload Ibaka. One of these young players that were mentioned earlier, so maybe it's Keon Johnson, maybe it's Giles, maybe it's Hartenstein that I mentioned. I think one of these other players have to play a role because their team is just older. So I don't think they can ask these players to play a lot of minutes. But this team is still almost, again, just built for the playoffs and just like, hey, we'll go through the regular season, win as much as we can, and kind of go from there. But solid built team. And let's transition over here and we'll end on this. For the Clippers, according to the Action Network, they have a 45 over-under win total for the season. I will smash the over on this. So you look at some of the just kind of offensive numbers for the Clippers. When Kawhi left in the series against the Jazz last year in the playoffs, you know, they ended up winning 2 more games against Utah. They competed really, really well with Phoenix, who ends up going to the finals. And that was minus Kawhi. So there is an ability, I think, for this team to kind of overachieve because a lot of people are going to count them out. A lot of people are just going to say, oh, well, if there's no Kawhi, then why bother pay attention to the Clippers this year? But Paul George, I think, is going to be due for an MVP kind of season. Maybe not to what he was doing his last year in Oklahoma City or his second last year in Oklahoma City, where he was an MVP candidate. But I think he'll up his game a lot. And I don't even think he was an all-star last year. I might be totally wrong on that, but we'll see. So I just think with Paul George, with Ty Lue, I think this is one of the better coaching staffs in the league too. I just think that overall they're going to be a little bit more motivated to just stay afloat and maybe hold out hope that Kawhi is going to come back and maybe be something in the playoffs. I initially had thought that Kawhi is probably not going to play this season, but there were some reports during, I think it was either training camp or media day, where the Clippers are kind of like not closing the door entirely on Kawhi coming back this season. Now that could change. Obviously, Kawhi's health has been a real up and down roller coaster in the past, but we'll see. But for the most part, I have them at 6. Yeah, I think they're better than Golden State. Come at me in the comments, and we'll see what happens because I think the Clippers are really good, and I think they'll be an entertaining team this year. I'm ending this one. Feel free to subscribe to the channel. We got another video coming out in just a minute. Feel free to check out our other videos and have a good day. We'll see you in the next one.